Seconds of complete silence before the first word. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? Not silence between notifications, not the silence of waiting for something to load. Real silence, the kind that makes you uncomfortable, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat, the kind where you are suddenly, unavoidably alone with yourself. Most people cannot do it. They reach for their phone within 30 seconds. They turn on music. They start a podcast. They find anything to fill the void. But what if the void is not something to be filled? What if the void is exactly where you need to go? For thousands of years, the world's greatest spiritual and philosophical traditions placed silence at the center of human transformation, not as a practice for monks in distant mountains, as a practice for anyone who wanted to understand themselves. This video is about what they knew, and about what we have almost completely destroyed. Title card: Slow Fade In from Black, the ET Psychology of Silence. We have built the loudest civilization in human history, not just in decibels, in density of stimulation. The average person today consumes over 34 gigabytes of information daily. Notifications, headlines, music, podcasts, conversations, alerts, a continuous, unbroken wall of noise from the moment we wake to the moment we collapse into sleep. And something profound has happened as a result. We have forgotten what we sound like, not our voice, not the words we say to others. The voice underneath, the one that speaks only in silence, the one the ancient world called the soul. Pascal, the French philosopher, wrote in the 17th century, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He wrote that before smartphones, before television, before radio. He saw it coming anyway. Because the problem was never the technology. The problem is the human terror of meeting oneself in the absence of distraction. The Pythagoreans, followers of the mathematician-philosopher Pythagoras, required new students to observe 5 years of complete silence before they were permitted to speak in the school. 5 years. Not because silence was punishment. Because they understood something: we have lost. You cannot receive wisdom while you are making noise. The mouth that is always open is a vessel that can never be filled. In the Hebrew tradition, the prophet Elijah fled into the wilderness broken, exhausted, ready to die. And God did not speak to him in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the great rushing wind, but in what the scripture calls a still small voice, a sound of sheer silence. The divine, it seems, does not shout, it whispers, and it whispers only to those who have learned to be still enough to hear. The contemplative traditions of the East built entire monasteries around this principle. The desert fathers of early Christianity fled to the Egyptian desert specifically to find silence. They called it hesychia, the Greek word for stillness, not the absence of sound, the presence of peace. They believed, and centuries of practice confirmed, that the human being who masters silence masters themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Notice what he said: not in nature, not in a monastery, not in a quiet room, in his own soul, because the Stoics understood that silence is not a place you go to, it is a state you cultivate, and it requires practice the same way a musician practices scales, daily, deliberately, without expectation of immediate reward. The ancient teachers used a consistent metaphor for the mind in silence: still water. A lake disturbed by wind cannot reflect the sky clearly. But when the wind stops, when stillness returns, the water becomes a perfect mirror. This is what silence does to the mind. It does not empty it, it clarifies it. The thoughts that were tangled become ordered. The fears that seemed enormous become proportionate. And beneath the noise of daily life, something deeper becomes audible. Call it intuition, conscience, wisdom, or God. The name matters less than the recognition. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, spent much of his life studying what he called the unconscious, the vast reservoir of the self that lies beneath conscious thought. He wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." But here is the thing Jung understood and most people miss: you cannot look inside while you are looking outside. The two directions are mutually exclusive. Every moment spent consuming external noise is a moment stolen from the interior life. And a person with no interior life is a person who does not know who they are. This is the crisis beneath all modern crises, not political, not economic, not social. the crisis of the self that has never been alone with itself long enough to discover what it actually is. The person who cannot sit in silence is a person running from something, and whatever you run from grows larger with every step. So how does one begin? The answer is uncomfortable in its simplicity. You begin by doing nothing. Not meditation with an app guiding you, not breathing exercises with a timer. You sit, you allow the discomfort, you do not reach for the phone, you do not fill the silence, and you wait. At first, the mind will riot. It will produce anxiety, boredom, restlessness. This is not failure. This is the beginning. This is the noise finally becoming audible because it no longer has competition. The Desert Fathers had a practice they called Lectio Divina, sacred reading, followed by sacred silence. They would read a single sentence, one sentence, and then sit with it in silence for an hour, not to analyze it, not to debate it, to let it descend from the mind into the heart. This is the difference between information and wisdom. Information enters through the ears and eyes. Wisdom enters only through silence. Begin with 10 minutes, not in meditation, not in prayer, unless that is your path. Simply in silence. Walk without music. Eat one meal without a screen. Sit with your morning coffee before you open anything. And notice what arises. Not to judge it, not to fix it, to witness it. Because the self that can witness its own thoughts without being consumed by them is a self that has found something the ancient world called interior freedom. And interior freedom is the only freedom that cannot be taken from you. The candle does not try to illuminate the entire room. It simply burns, quietly, consistently, without announcement. And the darkness around it is not the enemy of the light. It is what makes the light visible. We are afraid of silence because we are afraid of ourselves. But the self waiting in the silence is not the self you fear. It is not the self made of failures and regrets. It is not the self made of anxieties and comparisons. It is something older, something quieter, something that was there before the noise began and will be there when the noise ends. The ancient teachers called it by many names: soul, logos, atman, the image of God. You may call it whatever you wish, but you will not find it while the noise is on. Sit with that. This is the examined life, barely a whisper. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs silence. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next examination.